This current lecture will discuss how emotions are adaptive. Within psychology, when we describe something as adaptive, we're discussing how evolutionary pressures led our ancestors with certain characteristics to be more likely to survive and pass on their genetics, which often included that characteristic. Therefore, we are all descendants of people who met evolutionary challenges. The three topics we will cover in this lecture are how we communicate through facial expressions, how emotions serve cognitive functions, and finally, how emotions strengthen relationships between people. The first thing we often think of when discussing communication are the words we say. This is a good channel for communicating, but not the only one. Others are tone, direction and intensity of our gaze, posture, and importantly for the current discussion, facial expressions. Think about anger. What does a person who is angry look like? Their brows lower and draw together. Their lips get tight and their eyes glare. Can you recognize it here? Do these people look angry to you? Interestingly, even babies demonstrate and recognize emotion. In fact, people born blind demonstrate some emotional facial expressions, even without seeing them. This indicates that at least some emotions are innate, that is, we're born with them, which, when that happens, is possibly due to evolutionary adaptation. So are facial expressions universal, that is, seen and recognized in every culture, or are they learned? Well, the answer is both. There are some emotions that are seen universally. In fact, there are 6 for sure, and maybe a 7th. The emotions seen universally are anger, happiness, surprise, fear, disgust, sadness, and the 7th may be contempt. In a series of studies, Paul Ekman and his colleagues examined the question of whether facial expressions were universal. They asked American participants to demonstrate facial expressions of emotion and then took photographs of them. They then took these photos to isolated tribes in Papua New Guinea, tribes that had very little contact with Westerners, and showed the photos to the people there. They asked the tribespeople to tell stories about when they felt the way they thought the person in the photograph was feeling. What Ekman found was that the tribespeople who had very limited exposure to Westerners and Western expressions were still able to recognize the major 6 emotions that we discussed as being universal. For example, when looking at a picture of a Western expression of sadness, one tribesman described how he had felt when he had learned his young daughter had died. Thus he had recognized that emotion. Ekman then took photos of the tribespeople demonstrating facial expressions of emotion and brought them back to the U.S. where he had Americans look and describe the emotions. Americans were able to do so. Take a look at these photos, which were drawn from Ekman's research. Do you recognize the emotions? The first facial expression is what this tribesman demonstrated when asked, "Show me what your face would look like if you met a friend," or happiness. The next, in the upper right, is "Show me what your face would look like if your child had died," or sadness. The lower left was in response to "Show me what your face would look like if you were about to fight," which you should recognize as anger. The last was in response to "What would your face look like if you had seen a pig that had lied out in the sun for a day?" One of the videos this week is titled, "Lies Are Written on Your Face." It discusses some of Ekman's recent work on facial expressions, in particular microexpressions, which are facial expressions that appear and disappear off your face in microseconds and are often not detected. This video is from the makers of the now canceled show Lie to Me. So why might some emotions be adaptive? Well, imagine you're an early human and you're sitting with your tribe around the fire. One of your fellow tribe members comes running into camp with a strange expression on her face. Her eyes are wide, her mouth is open, and tensed backwards. In fact, she looks like this. She keeps running past your fire and out the other side of camp. What do? Well, it probably depends on if you recognize the emotion or not. She's obviously terrified and is likely running from something. You would probably either run after her to get away from whatever is chasing her, or prepare to fight whatever is coming. In either case, recognizing her emotion has given you an advantage over someone who didn't recognize the emotion, making it more likely that you would survive and be able to procreate, while the individual who didn't recognize it may have died. If this type of event occurs over time, multiple times, eventually those who have the advantage of recognizing emotion would have more children who have a good likelihood of having those genes that help recognize emotions. We all have ancient ancestors who were emotion recognizers, so now we are too. So while the big 6 or 7 emotions, if you include contempt, are universally shown and recognized, there are others that are not. Some emotions are found in some cultures but not others, or demonstrated different in one culture versus the other. These emotions include guilt, shame, embarrassment, and pride. These emotions rely on social interaction. That is, they're learned. Think about pride. How do you know when to feel pride? You need to have some kind of comparison to others to know if you did well or not. Even with universal emotions, they're not always demonstrated to the same degree between cultures or even within cultures. That is, there are rules to when and who should demonstrate particular emotions. These are known as display rules. Some cultures show emotion more easily than others. Additionally, many cultures have different display rules for each gender. Think about the display rule in the West that boys don't cry. Across many cultures, the display rules are that women show more emotion than men. However, research has found that the two genders do not differ in their feelings of emotions or the intensity. For a long time, psychologists thought of cognition as separate from emotional processing. They often thought of humans as strictly rational decision makers. However, as emotional creatures, our emotions often impact our thinking, and thinking can impact emotions. They are not completely independent processes. For example, when we are in a good mood, we often persist in the face of failure and find interesting and often creative solutions to problems. We can also change our emotions by thinking about either pleasant or unpleasant memories. Think about the following question. This weekend, would you rather go for a hike in the forest or go see the newest blockbuster movie? Did you think rationally about this decision, or did you go with how you might feel about either? Emotions influence our decision-making in a number of ways. First, we can anticipate what emotional state each situation will induce in us. That is, we use this future emotional state as a heuristic or shortcut to determine which is preferable. This is a good method, but has a drawback that recent or vivid events can have an overly strong influence on our behavior. For example, if we recently went on a hike and twisted our ankle, we might choose the movie, even if typically we would prefer outdoor activities to sedentary ones. In addition to using our predicted future emotions to make decisions, we could use our current mood as well. Norman Schwartz and Gerald Clores' affect as information theory states that we use our current moods to make judgments, even if we don't know the source of our mood. People in good moods tend to rate their lives as satisfactory, while people in bad moods give lower ratings to their life satisfaction. This effect diminishes if people are made aware of the source of their good mood. For example, they just found money on the street, or it's a nice day out. The final topic we will discuss in this lecture is another adaptive function of emotions, in that they strengthen interpersonal relationships. Human beings are social creatures who function best in groups. A solitary human in the evolutionary history was not likely to survive, and even less likely to mate to pass on their genetics. So maintaining relationships is evolutionarily adaptive. Therefore, being able to recognize and influence the emotions of others, and to communicate our emotions to those around us, is important to maintaining social cohesion. Guilt is one of the secondary emotions that has garnered quite a bit of research. How do you think guilt can strengthen social bonds? First, guilty feelings increase the likelihood that we will avoid doing something that will harm those around us, or that might harm our relationships. Second, showing guilt also demonstrates to others that we care about our relationships and that we feel badly about what we did. Third, we can use expressions of guilt to manipulate the feelings of others. For example, a mother could use guilt to get her children to do their chores. Since guilt is a secondary emotion, how and when we experience guilt is learned through interactions with our social environment. This is known as socialization. Think about how politicians and celebrities caught in sex scandals have used facial expressions of guilt to both communicate remorse and perhaps manipulate those around them. Another socially learned emotion that influences social relationships is embarrassment and blushing. Blushing is an interesting phenomenon. Darwin called it the most peculiar and human of all expressions. Think about circumstances in which you've been embarrassed and perhaps blushed. How might it be useful for strengthening social bonds? It could be that it indicates to those around us that we are aware of the social faux pas that we made. This also helps to indicate that we submit to and recognize affiliations to groups. This helps us to repair interpersonal mistakes. One final example of an emotion that might help strengthen social bonds is the primary emotion of sadness. Darwin was perplexed as to why we cried, stating, "We must look at weeping as an incidental result, as purposeless as the secretion of tears from a blow outside the eye." However, why might crying strengthen social bonds? Maybe it is adaptive. What do you feel when you look at these pictures of people crying? Do you feel drawn to them? Do you also feel empathetic sadness? Do you feel motivated to find out why they are sad and perhaps offer support? Crying has been documented in other animals, but only humans produce emotional tears and are the only species in which crying is found in adults. Psychologist Ad Vitterhoots proposes the theory that tears are a form of social signaling that evolved from mammalian distress calls. A clear visual signal, in other words, that someone is in pain or danger and needs help. John Bowlby long ago highlighted the role of crying in engendering attachment between mother and child, and British neurologist Michael Trimble recently linked crying to the human capacity for empathy. To summarize, we have seen that the 6 or maybe 7 universal primary emotions have developed in response to evolutionary pressures and are found in all cultures and recognized by people around the world. That we can recognize and express emotions has been important to our species and is vital to maintaining and strengthening social relationships.